The north was burning with tension. After the fall of the wall and the rise of the Night King, the free folk were scattered, broken, and leaderless. Mance Rayder was long dead, and though Tormund Johntsbane tried to keep them together, fear had taken deep root in their hearts. But the real danger wasn't just the White Walkers. It was the silence, the waiting, and the lack of unity that would kill them faster. Jon Snow stood quietly on a ridge overlooking the wild lands beyond the wall. Beside him stood two very different men, Tormund, the red-bearded wildling leader with fire in his blood, and Sandor Clegane, the Hound, a man who had no love for glory, but a taste for war. The Hound had no reason to fight for the free folk, but he'd seen the dead rise, and he knew one truth better than most. You either fight, or you die. And if you die, you don't stay dead anymore. Jon turned to them. They won't follow a king, he said. Not again. Not after Mance. They'll follow someone who's bled with them, Tormund growled. Someone who doesn't talk, just fights. That ain't you, Crow, the Hound smirked. You still talk too much, Tormund chuckled. But Jon didn't smile. His eyes were locked on the distant snowfields, where shadows moved like ghosts. The dead were cunning. We don't have time to argue, Jon said. We lead them together, all three of us. If they won't follow one man, maybe they'll follow three. Fighters, not kings. The plan was mad. The free folk didn't kneel, not to lords or legends. But survival makes people do strange things. Over the next few days, Jon, Tormund, and the Hound moved from one camp to another, gathering what was left of the free folk. Women who had lost husbands. Boys too young to remember the wall. Old warriors with frozen beards and hollow eyes. At first, many refused. Why should we follow a crow? Or a southern dog, they spat. But when Jon showed them the dragonglass weapons, when Tormund spoke of the last stand, and when the Hound simply growled, either fight beside us or rot beside them, things began to change. They trained on the ice. They forged weapons out of stone, steel, and whatever they could scavenge. The Hound taught them how to use weight and rage in battle. Tormund brought fire to their hearts with stories of victory. And Jon, quiet and serious, gave them purpose. He didn't promise survival. He didn't lie. He only told them the truth. They had one chance, and it was together. One night, while the wind howled like wolves, a scout returned. Pale as snow, shivering, he dropped to his knees. They're close, he gasped. Thousands, the dead march. They don't stop. The camp fell silent. Mothers held children close. Old warriors checked their blades. Jon looked at the two men beside him. Tomorrow we meet death, he said. Good, the Hound muttered. I've got a score to settle. Tormund grinned, blood in his teeth. Let's give these bastards a fight they'll never forget. They stood atop the snowy cliffs, torches lighting the faces of the gathered free folk. This wasn't a real army. There were no uniforms, no banners, just tired people with blades, fire, and fury. But sometimes that was all you needed. The storm in the distance grew louder. Jon raised his sword. We fight for the living, he shouted. We fight for our people. And we fight because we've got no other damn choice. They roared in reply. And when the first blue-eyed corpse appeared on the ridge, dragging a shattered sword, the free folk did not run. They screamed into the snow, into the face of death itself, and they charged. Snow slammed into their faces like knives. The wind screamed louder than the battle cries, but still, the free folk charged. Jon Snow ran at the front, Longclaw gleaming with dragonglass in the dim light. Tormund was right beside him, his axe already coated in blackened blood. Behind them, the Hound thundered forward, cursing every dead thing in his way. The first clash was brutal. The dead didn't scream. They didn't feel. They just clawed, stabbed, and tore. One moment, A free folk warrior shouted beside Jon, and the next he was dragged under by 3 whites, his throat ripped open. There was no time to grieve, no time to think, only to kill. Jon swung again and again, each strike fueled by rage and fear. The dead fell, but more kept coming, pouring over the ridge like a wave of rot. Somewhere in the chaos, he saw Tormund wrestling a white walker with his bare hands, slamming it into the ground before driving a dagger of dragonglass into its skull. It shattered like ice. The Hound was a storm of fury. He didn't care about formation, didn't care about defense. He smashed skulls with a warhammer, cut down 3 whites with one swing, then grabbed a burning branch and set another ablaze while spitting, "Burn, you ugly pieces of shit," but they were being pushed back. Slowly, steadily. The free folk were brave, but they were outnumbered 5 to 1. For every white they killed, 2 more crawled over the corpses. Jon saw the line breaking near the East Hill. A group of young fighters, barely older than boys, were being surrounded. Without thinking, he ran toward them. He shouted, slashing through the undead, carving a path to the trapped boys. One was screaming, blood pouring from his leg. Another had dropped his blade and was sobbing in the snow. Jon reached them just in time, pulling the wounded boy over his shoulder. "Move!" he barked at the rest. "Fall back to the torches." The Hound came thundering in behind him, smashing whites like insects. "What are you, a bloody babysitter now?" Jon ignored him. "We need to hold the ridge, or we're done." Tormund appeared moments later, blood running from a cut on his forehead, his axe broken, but still swinging a bone club. "We can't hold him forever, Snow. Where the hell is our second wave?" There was supposed to be another force circling around the young valley free folk hunters and spear throwers, but they hadn't shown. Either they were lost in the storm or dead already. Jon looked around. The torches were fading. The lines were crumbling. For a moment, a cold fear grabbed his chest. Was this it? Were they going to die here in the snow like whispers in the dark? Then he heard the horn. A long, low blow echoed across the valley. Another, and another. From the west came shadows figures running fast. A second wave finally, but they were different. They wore bones as armor, rode on snow wolves, and howled as they charged. The Thenns had arrived, fierce and savage, slamming into the dead from the side and breaking their formation. Tormund laughed so loud it echoed over the screams. "Took you long enough, you cannibal bastards." With the reinforcements, the tide turned just slightly, enough to breathe, enough to push back. Jon fought his way to a high rock to look over the field. Bodies were everywhere, living and dead, but they were holding, barely. He saw a white walker stalking toward the rear, heading for the children and wounded. Jon leapt from the rock and raced toward it. The walker saw him coming, icy blade raised. It was taller, stronger, faster. Their blades met with a crash, sparks flying. Lone Claw hissed against the icy metal. The walker was silent, its dead eyes locked on Jon's. It struck again and again, forcing Jon back. His arms ached, lungs burned, but he didn't stop. Finally, he ducked low, rolled under a swing, and drove Lone Claw straight through its chest. The walker shrieked and exploded into icy shards. Jon collapsed in the snow, chest heaving. Around him, the battle still raged, but he'd done it. One more walker down, one step closer to survival. But somewhere in the blizzard, far beyond the ridge, a darker presence stirred. The Night King was watching. The wind fell silent for a moment. Just a moment, but it was enough. Enough for the warriors to breathe, enough for Jon to rise again, and enough for the fear to settle in their bones. Because in that unnatural calm, they felt it. Every man and woman on that battlefield, no matter how brave, turned their heads toward the far edge of the ridge. He was there. The Night King, tall, cold, motionless like a statue carved from death itself. He stood above the battle like a god, staring down with those lifeless blue eyes. Behind him stood lieutenants' white walkers, with curved icy blades, their armor glistening like frost-covered bone. Jon's blood froze. The Night King didn't need to shout. He didn't need to lead a charge. His presence alone was enough to turn the bravest soldier into a shaking mess. Tormund spat in the snow. "He's here for you, Snow." "I know," Jon replied, tightening his grip on Longclaw. His fingers trembled not from the cold, but from something deeper. Dread. The Hound walked up behind them, his face half covered in frozen blood. "Well, if he wants you, he can come and bloody get you. I'm not running." Then the Night King raised his arms. All around the battlefield, the dead began to rise. The free folk who had just died, those brave souls who had fallen with blades in hand, now stood up again, blue-eyed, silent, and empty. Some of them still had blood dripping from their mouths. Others had missing limbs, crushed skulls, or shattered bones. It didn't matter. They stood. They obeyed. A scream tore through the air. One of the women saw her own brother rise from the snow, his eyes glowing. She charged him, begging him to stop. He didn't. He tore her throat out with his bare hands. The panic spread like fire. Jon shouted, "Fall back to the inner circle. Dragonglass at the front. Fire on the flanks. Don't let them touch the wounded." But the line was broken again, and this time the dead were not strangers. They were friends, lovers, sons and daughters. Tormund slammed his fist into a rising corpse, tears in his eyes. "This ain't right. This ain't fucking right. We can't kill them all." A boy shouted as he swung at a former elder of his clan. "No," the Hound growled, smashing a dead warrior's face in with a flaming log. "But we can hold the line until the snow turns red." Jon moved through the chaos like a shadow, cutting down the dead again, some for the second or third time. His arms felt like lead, but he kept swinging. One misstep, one hesitation, and it would all be over. Behind him, a girl screamed, trapped under the body of her fallen father, now risen. Jon lunged, driving Longclaw through the white's back. She stared at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. She was barely 10. "Run to the fire pits." He barked. Then he heard the sound something like wings, but colder. Not the sound of wind or battle. The sky above them cracked with frost as Viserion appeared. Undead, twisted, breathing blue fire. The Night King's dragon circled the battlefield with unnatural grace. Its rotting wings spread wide as it screeched, and with one terrifying roar, it dove. A stream of icy flame blasted the left flank of the free folk. It wasn't heat, it was death itself. The fire froze everything it touched, bodies, trees, even the snow, turning the ground to shattered glass. Dozens died instantly. Jon stared up, helpless. He had no dragon, no denaries, no backup. "Shit," the Hound muttered. "We're not fighting a war. We're fighting a damn apocalypse." Jon knew what had to be done. "Tormund, take command of the front. Hold the ridge. Where the hell are you going?" "To end this," Jon said. "He's here for me. Maybe if I kill him, the rest die with him." The Hound grabbed his arm. "You think that works, Snow? You kill him, everything stops? What if you're wrong?" "Then we die anyway," Jon replied, already turning. He started up the ridge toward the Night King, alone. Jon climbed the snowy slope, each step heavier than the last. The storm screamed around him, but his mind was quiet, focused. He knew this path might be his last. He wasn't a king here, not a hero, just a man walking toward death, dragging his sword behind him like a shadow. The Night King didn't move. He stood perfectly still at the top of the ridge, watching Jon approach like a spider waiting for its prey. The other White Walkers stepped aside, forming a line behind their master, silent as ice statues. They didn't need to protect him. They knew the truth. None of them feared death. Jon stopped just 10 steps away. Snow whipped around them, but between them was only silence. Lone Claw hummed in Jon's hand. The Night King tilted his head, just slightly, like he was curious. Or amused. Jon didn't wait. He roared and charged, slashing with everything he had. Steel met ice. The Night King blocked the blow with his own frozen blade. The sound echoed like breaking glass. Jon spun, striking again, this time low, but the Night King sidestepped with unnatural grace and countered. His blade barely missed Jon's throat. Cold brushed his skin. They moved like ghosts in the storm. Jon grunted, sweat freezing on his face. The Night King didn't breathe, didn't tire, didn't flinch. Every strike he made was fast and precise, too fast. Jon barely kept up. Below, the battlefield raged on. Tormund led the free folk like a wild bear, roaring orders, swinging a new axe taken from a fallen foe. Fire pits were burning brighter now, as the Hound hurled barrels of oil and flaming torches into the thickest swarms of dead. But it was chaos. Too many whites. Too much fear. Tormund saw Jon on the ridge, locked in battle. "Come on, Snow," he whispered. "You can't bloody die now." Jon ducked another swing, rolled, and drove Lone Claw up, cutting through the Night King's armor. Blue blood hissed into the snow. The Night King staggered, but didn't fall. Instead, he stepped back, his face still unreadable. Jon panted, blade shaking in his hand. Come on, you cold bastard." The Night King raised his hand again. Jon's heart dropped. He knew what was coming. All around them, the dead began to stir again. The bodies Jon had cut down on the way up, the ones he thought were gone, twitched, then rose. One grabbed his leg. Another grabbed his arm. Jon kicked, slashed, but there were too many. "No!" he screamed, trying to break free. The Night King just watched, his hand still raised. Jon struggled, desperate, but one white grabbed his throat and forced him to the ground. Lone Claw slipped from his fingers. And then, a roar, not from a beast, from a man, Tormund. He came charging up the ridge with 5 free folk warriors behind him, hurling dragonglass-tipped spears into the rising whites. He reached Jon, grabbed him by the collar, and yanked him up. "Thought I told you not to die, Crow." Together, they cut down the nearest whites and cleared space. Jon gasped. "Why are you here? You were supposed to hold the line." Tormund grinned through bloody teeth. "Line's gone to hell. Figured if we're dying, might as well die fighting gods." The Hound wasn't far behind. He came trudging up, dragging a torch in one hand, half his face singed with frost. "You're welcome, bastards," he muttered, setting 3 whites on fire without breaking stride. The Night King finally moved. He stepped forward and raised his sword again. Jon retrieved Lone Claw. This time, he wasn't alone. The 3 of them stood side by side, Jon Snow, Tormund Johnspane, and the Hound. Fighters, survivors. No kings, no titles. Just men standing between life and death. The Night King charged, and the real fight began. The clash was unlike anything the North had seen. Not just steel on steel, but death against the last embers of life. The Night King moved like a shadow made of ice, striking fast and cold. Jon barely blocked his blade. Tormund roared and swung his axe, but the Night King ducked effortlessly, slashing across Tormund's chest and sending him sprawling into the snow. The Hound charged next, torch blazing in one hand, dragonglass sword in the other. "Come on, you frozen prick," he growled, swinging with all his fury. Fire licked the air, but the Night King turned, stepped sideways, and rammed the hilt of his icy sword into the Hound's stomach. The blow sent him crashing back down the slope, groaning in the snow. Jon came at him again, eyes wild, breath fogging. Their blades met Longclaw against the icy steel of death. This time, Jon didn't hold back. He didn't try to be a knight. He fought like a wolf, snapping, slashing, dodging with pure instinct. His blade cut through the Night King's side again, deeper this time. The creature staggered, the first hint of pain flashing across his frozen face, but he didn't fall. Instead, he raised his other hand. Jon's eyes widened. He knew what came next. A storm erupted. Not of snow, but of screams. From every direction, the Night King's minions advanced, White Walkers, Whites, the reanimated corpses of fallen warriors, all rushing toward the ridge like an avalanche of horror. The free folk below saw it too. Panic began to spread. People turned to flee. The line was collapsing again. Fall back. Someone shouted, "It's over." But it wasn't over. Not yet, because from the east came a sudden burst of fire-real fire. Orange, roaring, beautiful. Ghost, Jon's dire wolf, forgotten by many, came tearing across the snow like a demon of flame and fury. His white fur was stained with blood, and he leapt into the charging dead, ripping them apart with teeth and claws. Behind him came the rest of the free folk, who hadn't fled older warriors, women with torches, even wounded men dragging blades. Tormund pulled himself to his feet, blood pouring from his chest. "Not yet," he growled. "We don't fall yet." He grabbed his broken axe, roared, and threw himself into the battle again. The Hound rose too, face twisted with rage and pain. He limped forward, grabbed a burning sword from the snow, and said through clenched teeth, "I don't care if he's a demon king or a dead queen. I'm going to burn the bastard." Jon faced the Night King one last time. No more talking. No more fear. He raised Longclaw and charged. The Night King blocked again. But Jon's rage was different now. It wasn't anger. It was everything he had ever lost. Ygritte, Ned, Robb, the Watch, the wildlings who trusted him. Everyone who died for a fight no one wanted. He ducked under a swing, rolled behind the Night King, and slashed at his back. The blade connected, but again, it wasn't enough. The Night King turned fast and stabbed, right into Jon's side. Jon gasped. Blood poured from the wound. He dropped to one knee, Longclaw slipping from his grip. Tormund saw it. No. He shouted, charging. But the Night King backhanded him aside like a child. The Hound roared and hurled his flaming sword, but the Night King caught it mid-air and crushed it in his icy grip. Jon tried to rise. His hand reached for Longclaw. But the pain, it was too much. The Night King stepped forward, raising his sword for the killing blow. And then a scream echoed through the storm. Not of pain, of fury. A free folk girl no older than 16 leapt from behind a burning tree, dragging a spear of dragonglass. She plunged it into the Night King's back with all her strength. The blade sank deep. He turned, slowly, eyes wide with surprise. The girl met his stare. "You killed my brothers," she whispered. Then the dragonglass shattered his chest. The Night King let out a low, haunting gasp, and cracked. From chest to face, ice split. His body trembled, glowing blue light leaking from within. Then he exploded. A shockwave of frost burst from his body, blasting snow into the sky and sending the White Walkers around him into screams of agony. One by one, they shattered into nothing. Below the ridge, the Whites froze mid-charge, then collapsed. The battle stopped. Just like that, Jon lay in the snow, bleeding, blinking at the sky. Tormund limped over to him, grabbing his arm. "Snow? You alive?" Jon coughed. "Barely." The Hound stumbled to them, bruised, burned, and out of breath. "Did we win?" No one spoke for a while. And then, from the shattered ridge, came the sound of something that hadn't been heard in days. Laughter. Tormund threw back his head and howled in triumph. They had done it. But the cost? They hadn't even begun to count it yet. The battlefield lay silent now, like the world itself was holding its breath. The snow no longer screamed through the wind. The air was heavy not just with cold, but with the weight of the dead. Hundreds of bodies, free folk, and fallen wights covered the valley, frozen in place. Some lay in piles, others sprawled alone, their eyes staring at nothing. The once mighty army of the dead had crumbled to ash and silence. The Night King was gone, but victory never felt so bitter. Tormund sat beside Jon, pressing cloth against his bleeding side. "You're lucky. That blade missed your guts by a finger." Jon grunted through clenched teeth. "You call this lucky?" The Hound leaned against a broken log, hands shaking as he tried to light a fire. His fingers were raw from frostbite. "We won, didn't we? Or did I just hallucinate an icy bastard exploding?" Jon looked around. Smoke curled from scattered torches. Ghost limped through the bodies, sniffing for any threat still lurking, fur streaked with blood and burns. The girl who stabbed the Night King, her name was Nira, one of the orphans from the southern tribes, sat nearby, shaking, the shattered spear still in her hands. "She saved us all," Tormund said, nodding toward her. Jon looked at her for a long moment, then forced himself to sit up. Every muscle screamed, but he had no right to rest. "Not yet. She needs to be protected," he said quietly. "She be seen as a symbol now. The free folk will turn her into something more." Tormund scoffed. "They won't worship her, Snow, but they'll remember. Maybe that's enough." Word of the Night King's fall spread like wildfire. Survivors began crawling back to the ridge, many half dead, others dragging the wounded. Some broke down and wept when they saw the lifeless bodies of their friends. Others simply stood in silence, unable to process what had happened. No cheers, no songs. Just disbelief. "I thought it'd feel better," the Hound muttered, watching the clouds shift above them. "What?" Jon asked. "Winning. Surviving. Kicking that undead bastard's icy teeth in. Feels empty." Jon understood. He felt it too. They had won the war, yes, but most of the people they fought beside were now corpses in the snow. The price of victory had been too high. He forced himself to stand, helped by Tormund. "We need to bury our dead. The real ones. Before the snow buries them first." The free folk never buried their warriors with fancy tombs or grand words. But that night they made fires. Dozens of them. And they sat in silence around the burning bodies, their faces lit by the flames, remembering those who had stood and fought when the world had turned to ice. Jon stood beside Ghost, watching the flames consume the fallen. Tormund limped up beside him. "You should say something. They'll listen now. I'm no king." "No," Tormund said. "You're not, but you led them anyway. And that matters." Jon stepped forward, his voice rough but strong. "They died free," he said, "not as servants, not as wights. They chose to stand and fight, not for crowns or castles, but for each other. That's all that matters in the end." The flames crackled louder. Some wept. Others bowed their heads. But something in the air shifted. A sense of peace, maybe. Or just the absence of fear. Later that night, Jon sat alone on a rock, away from the others. Ghost rested beside him, head on his paws. He stared up at the stars, trying to feel something. Pride, relief, hope. Instead, he just felt tired. The Hound came over with a skin of ale. "You gonna keep brooding until your eyebrows freeze off?" Jon smirked faintly. "That's the plan." The Hound sat down beside him. "So what now?" "I don't know," Jon said. "There's no war left. No wall, no watch. There's always another war," the Hound muttered. "Just give it time." Jon didn't argue. Maybe he was right. Tormund joined them too, dragging furs and a small roasted hare. "We lived through the end of the world," he said. Might as well eat like it. They sat together, 3 battered, broken men who had somehow survived. No thrones, no banners. Just the fire, the stars, and the quiet. And somewhere far beyond the ridge, the snow kept falling. But for once, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like rest. The next morning rose slowly, as if the sun itself was hesitant to return to this frozen battlefield. A pale light stretched over the snow, revealing the full weight of what had happened. Smoke still rose from funeral pyres, and the ground was blackened in patches where the fires had raged. Bodies of whites lay scattered like broken dolls, their blue eyes forever closed. The survivors moved like ghosts. There weren't many less than 1/3 of those who had come to fight. Every step they took was heavy with grief, but they were alive. And that mattered. Jon stood overlooking the valley, his wound wrapped in thick furs, pain pulsing with every breath. Ghost sat beside him, tail twitching, ears alert even in this new silence. Tormund was helping carry the last of the wounded down to the new camp, and the Hound, well, he was off muttering to himself, kicking snow like it had insulted him. Jon didn't know what came next. He wasn't sure if he even wanted to know. He had come to fight the dead, to save the free folk. That part was done. But he could feel it deep inside. He didn't belong in the South. Not anymore. Not among lords, queens, and thrones. His place was here, in the cold, among the broken. Nira, the girl who had killed the Night King, stood not far away, still holding the hilt of her shattered spear like a relic. She hadn't spoken since the battle. People kept approaching her, calling her brave, a hero. She didn't answer. Her eyes were hollow, like she had left part of herself inside the Night King when she drove that blade in. Jon walked over quietly. "You saved us," he said gently. She didn't look up. "I killed him. But I didn't save my brothers." He nodded slowly. "I've killed a lot of men. Monsters, too. That never brings the dead back. They were just boys," she whispered. "They didn't even want to fight. But they followed me. They followed you because they believed in you. Just like the rest of us do now." Finally, she looked at him. "What if I don't want to be remembered?" "Then don't be," Jon said. "Just live. That's all the dead would want." She gave a small, sad nod and walked away, toward the fires. Later that day, Tormund called a gathering. What was left of the free folk stood in a circle, wind blowing through their ragged clothes. No thrones, no speeches. Just warriors, mothers, hunters, and children survivors. Tormund raised his voice. "We fought death, and we won. Not because we had magic, not because we had kings, but because we fought together. That's all that ever mattered." He turned to Jon. "This man, this crow, stood with us when no one else would. He didn't ask for your loyalty. He just fought." Some of the free folk nodded. Others just stared. Tormund looked back. "He belongs with us now. If he wants to stay?" All eyes fell on Jon. He hesitated. The North had never truly welcomed him. The South had used him. The Watch was gone. And the people he had tried so hard to protect, most had died anyway. But here, among the free folk, in the snow and fire and blood, he had found something real. He stepped forward. "I'm not a king. I don't want a crown. But if you'll have me, I'll fight beside you. I'll live among you." As one of you, there was no roar of cheers. Just quiet nods, a few hands on shoulders, and tired eyes that said, "You've earned this." The next days were spent building, not walls, not fortresses, but homes. Tents were repaired. Fires were lit. The dead were buried where they'd fallen, stone markers placed at their heads. The land would remember them, even if no songs were sung. The Hound eventually left. No goodbyes. Just a grunt and a muttered, "Done with snow," as he disappeared south with a pack of supplies and a burning torch. Jon watched him go, knowing they'd never see each other again, but grateful for what he'd done. Tormund stayed, of course. He became a leader, though he never called himself one. He helped build the new free folk villages, taught boys how to fight, and girls how to scare off bears with just a scream. And Jon? Jon found peace not in glory or power, but in simplicity. He hunted, he built, he listened. He laughed again, slowly. He taught the children how to ride. He rode ghosts through the woods. And every night he looked at the stars and whispered the names of those he had lost. Winter didn't leave. It never did. But life returned. And that was enough.